Teachers, what's the worst case of no, not my child you've ever seen from a parent who's been called in for their kid's behavior? A 4-year-old boy in my class was picking fights on a daily basis and would lash out at teachers that tried to intervene. Punching, kicking, throwing chairs, screaming at the top of his lungs. He was being raised by his grandma, who was thoroughly convinced that everything we told her was exaggerated or that the other kids were the ones starting the fights. When I was 6 months pregnant, he was mad that outside time was over. So he pushed me with both of his arms right in my belly. When I told his grandma, she asked if I was having a girl. I was. She chuckled. He's fighting with her. Because boys and girls don't get along. It'd be a miracle if that kid doesn't end up in prison. Edit. Since a lot of people are asking. My child is totally perfect and the shove didn't do any damage. Also, for those suggesting the kid should have been shoved or smacked or kicked across the room, please keep in mind that he was 4. As teachers, it's our jobs to be more control of our emotions than our students. Not a teacher, but my wife volunteered at the school store where kids could buy erasers, pencils, etc. 2 older girls repeatedly came in and stole things, on camera, while she was working. She reported it and they called the girls and the parents in. Told them what happened and they said their children wouldn't do that. Then the school showed the parents the video and the parents still claimed their children wouldn't steal, all while watching it happen on video. They were banned from the store and the parents actually said that the school was just being racist because their daughters wouldn't steal. I've worked retail for years and this is very common with adults who shoplift. We'll have video evidence and people will still deny it. They probably had parents that did this and they never grew out of it. The best ultimatum we give is you can either give the stuff back and never return, or we can hand this video over to the cops and you can try to convince them this isn't you. Double quote. Many years ago I had this awful boy in the next class with a girl that was not at all there. I was the teacher next door. They were about 7. One of the boys was basically banging the girl up against a desk from behind very hard and it was hurting the girl. So he'll pull back a bit and then slam himself as hard as he can against her butt as she's bent over a table. These kids are 7, so who knows what's going through their head. I'm not implying anything. Shouted stop. They stopped. Then I told their teacher. That's all I did. Teacher wrote a note home. Parent comes in livid. Shouting at everyone saying I scared the kid. Doesn't matter what their kid was doing. If I ever say anything to the kid again they'll get me fired. Boss watched the video, cleared me of wrongdoing. Notes the kid had been abusing that girl for a while before I got there. Told the parents. She didn't give 2 fucks. Railed on about how I traumatized her child by yelling stop while her kid was assaulting a mentally handicapped girl. There was a kid in my class whose father was a Wall Street banker and his mom was a doctor. Basically, the kid's parents were never around. This kid was the freaking worst. He would stick tacks on other kids' chairs when they got up to blow their nose or sharpen their pencil. I caught him rifling through other students' lunches one morning and he had a pack of Twinkies in his hand. I told him to put the Twinkies back and sent him to the principal. One time he was having a beef with some other kid and waited for the kid to use the bathroom. Followed him in. And punched him in the gut. There are no security cameras in the bathroom and he didn't leave a mark. So nobody could really prove anything one way or the other. During parent-teacher conference I told his mom that her son needs to stop playing poker on his Apple Watch during class as well as some other proven behavior problems. She flew off the handle and said, how dare you accuse my son of doing that stuff. You dumb broad. That conversation explained a lot about where he got it. I had a parent follow me to my offices multiple times after I caught her son cheating. He was caught red-handed. The policy is a 0. It just happened to be on the biggest grade of the year. Pretty much failing him for the class. His mother came to lecture me that he would never. I showed her the proof, video of him in class cheating, and she began screaming that it was doctored footage. I kicked her out of my office. It didn't stop there. She came to a faculty meeting, tried to take me to court, and followed me through a store one day. I had to call the cops. Also, This was when I was an adjunct at a college and the student in question was 23. I told a 9th grader that unless she started showing up to school regularly and got her grades up, she would be transferred to an alternative high school as a sophomore. She was failing everything, and once you fall so many classes behind, it's virtually impossible to get caught up in our district. Her mom called a conference with the assistant principal to discuss the tone of voice I used, and completely ignored the fact that her kid was missing school multiple days and was likely failing all her classes due to her poor attendance. 7-year-old boy had a dispute with another classmate culminating in yelling "Suck my DC motherfucker," and then immediately bursting into tears. The other teacher's aide and I reprimanded him. He was very contrite and cried quietly. After school we called his guardian to let her know what had happened. Said guardian was an elderly, religious aunt who flew into an indignant rage when we related what our ward had said. It was impossible. He didn't know words like that. No one had ever said words like that in their home. And if he did say that, which he knew he didn't, it must have been because we taught him how to say it. Oh yes. How could I have forgotten? We taught them for lesson right after basic addition last week. I questioned whether it was possible he had heard it from his 2 high school age brothers. Done. And that prompted even more indignant rage. A week or so later, the school lunch lady informed this kiddo they were out of pizza or something, and this instance of "suck my DC motherfucker" warranted a phone call home from the principal, who was also unsuccessful in convincing auntie what the kid had said. Apparently we were all engineering a school-wide conspiracy to ruin their family's reputation. I was an English teacher on my dad's private high school. In Venezuela private schools are more common, but then college is free. Caught him selling drugs and with stolen property in his backpack. Because of child protections laws in Venezuela, you can't search students or accuse them with police, or even expel them, because that would make the student feel bad. We called his mom and she started yelling at us because her kid was such an angel and how dare us, and that we were all against her poor child. A week later he was shot 17 times in gang shootout and she came asking us to go to the funeral. A mother whose son was excluded from school and she had been asked to make sure he was supervised at home. She insisted he did everything they asked and was never a problem at home. I telephoned her to make an appointment to meet her with him and asked if he was at home. She said he was and was sitting at the dining table with her doing the work he had been set by the school. I said that was odd, as I could actually see him as I was speaking to her. He was busy riding on a motorbike on the field outside my office, shouting "fucking wankers" at the classrooms and flicking the verses at us all. She said I must be mistaken. I asked if she could put him on the phone so I could speak to him, and there was a pause followed by her saying he's just popped out to the corner shop to get me some cigarettes. Really? I took a video of him on my iPad as he drove back past on his motorbike shouting and swearing. Unmistakable. Not a teacher. My nephew was playing Minecraft at a friend's house with his bestie. Both boys have autism. The friend's father is a world-renowned expert in IT and cybersecurity. They were playing on a private server set up by the dad. The boys got into a fight because the nephew was spawn camping the friend. The friend then logged in as an alt and blew up a building that the nephew was working on for several hours. The fight escalated until the friend held down the nephew and started punching him. When confronted, the nephew admitted spawn camping, while the friend claimed that someone had hacked in and dynamited the building. Not him. His mother believed her son rather than accepting that the chances of someone penetrating a hardened network and server just to blow up a stranger's building in MC and disappear without a trace were practically non-existent, while the chances of a preteen boy acting like a jerk out of retribution and lying about it to avoid getting into trouble are virtually 100%. All these folks posting exactly what it sounded like you asked for. Here's one completely different but still exactly what the title said. These parents had 2 average kids who they loved and adored. I don't know that they ever never with my child the school for those, but they sure did on number 3. You see, number 3 was an accident. An unwanted unexpected pregnancy that resulted in a beautiful, smart baby boy. Number 3 has a note on his file now. Do not call home. Because if you call home, and say little Billy worked really well today. Got second in the class on the test. And nailed the practical the answer. In a tone between incredulousness and utter hatred as fucking hell he did not. You do not just call me and lie about my child. What did he really f***ing get? Double quote. These parents hate their third child. Outright hate. Family services have been called because of what we know believe has happened level hate. They simply cannot comprehend that this kid is nice, clever and a decent human being. They refuse to acknowledge the possibility. So that's the worst case of not my kid that I have. Stroke. A kiddo tried to bite a classmate and his dad flipped out. These kids are between 1 and 2. 5 at this point, so some biting is par for the course. It's a really common behavior that can come from a lot of causes: teething, frustration, affection, so seasoned toddler teachers don't generally panic. I like to give families a gentle heads up if I notice their kid attempt to bite, even if it's unsuccessful. This starts the conversation early, so if they manage to bite someone and leave a mark, it's not as shocking since I'm required to do paperwork when someone causes an injury. This usually works really well at helping families know that I'm not kicking their kid out or punishing them for biting. But this dad lost it. He claimed his child has never bitten and would never do that, and accused me of teaching letting him learn to bite. No level of talking about his child's positive behaviors or the science behind biting helped. He started making demands that I punish any child who bites to discourage the behavior. We didn't get along well for the rest of the year. Not a teacher, but this neighborhood kid when I was 5, he was 6, would basically rip off my clothes and ran away to the point I had to chase him around the yard and house naked, and his mom came down from cleaning and I got in trouble for it. And when I went home, when I finally got my clothes back, I told my mom what happened and she had a fight with that mom and she was like, my boy would never do that. And my mom and her were friends up until that point and I was never allowed to play there again. Teacher here. When a student threw himself at me and it was my fault for being 24 at the time and therefore more their age than the staff's age, so it's understandable and I should be flattered? Double quote. Gotta be tough when teaching that young. My parents started teaching at 22 right out of college. Both at the same high school. Mom said the senior boys tried to make moves on her all the time. Finally she asked my dad, who at that time was fresh from his college football and wrestling days, to come visit the class and introduce himself. The boys stopped after that. Then again. It was also the 60s and my dad pushed a kid against a locker for calling my mom a rude name. Definitely wouldn't fly now. My friend is a teacher. She had a kid who threatened to shoot up the school last year. I guess it got pretty far as it was considered a viable threat and the police were called. They searched his house for weapons. Found some minor weapons from my understanding, but no major guns or anything. The items were confiscated and he continues to go to the school in her classes. He looks up white supremacy and gun stuff on the computers at school regularly. His mom says the situation last year was just his little mistake. Double quote. Side note. This was not in the US. A family on the street had a lot of kids that ranged from toddler to in their 30s. I think they had about 15-20 children in total and tons of grandchildren. They owned 2 houses that were side by side on my street, as well as the 2 houses directly behind them on the next street over. Then they knocked down all the fences so the houses were all essentially on one connected lot. This family was huge, so people would constantly come and go. All of them were generally assholes and bullies. They said a lot of racist stuff. Their high school age son sprayed bug spray in some elementary school kids' eyes. They would constantly borrow things like bikes and skateboards from other kids in the neighborhood and completely destroy them. They would break people's Christmas decorations and stuff in their yards. They were always fighting. One of them actually killed somebody in an armed robbery, and another attempted to kill somebody. But none of their kids ever did anything wrong. According to the parents, all they kept saying was that their kids were good little Christians who went to church 3 days per week. I tried really hard to avoid them, but I lived right next door. Went to school with some of them, and some of them were my age. So it was kind of impossible. ESL teacher. In Korea I was called back to the private school late at night. An angry mother was there. Through a Korean teacher she was livid. I called her daughter a thief for stealing some felt markers. I told her the daughter had the pens on her. Admit to having the pens. And then I showed her the CCTV where my back was turned. And she grabbed the pens on her way out. The mother insisted the daughter didn't take them. She took them outside and gave them to a boy who took them. Even though she still had the pens in her bag. By that time I had enough. Told her to leave. She argued. Said something rude in Korean and she scurried away. I am 6 foot and 200 pounds. Huge in Korea. Then my boss broke down in tears. Apparently the mother was hitting my boss before I came in. I didn't know. I said if that ever happened again for any reason, call me and I'd be there in minutes to throw whoever out on their ear. Was a teacher in my previous career. That's another story. It was a private school with uniforms. But one girl repeated showed up in a skirt that was just too short. It barely covered her butt. Much less anything else when she bent over. When we had parent-teacher conference, I had the opportunity to mention it to her mom. Of course. She said, no, not my child. Because mom's skirt was just too short. Why bother putting your daughter in a school with uniforms and paying private tuition when you don't bother to follow the rules? They left after that year. Wonder why? 3 kids in a 4/5 split didn't like one of their teachers. During journal time they decided to get together and drew a picture of that teacher. Surrounded by penises and the words, "Teacher, sucks dicks for money." Obviously. The teacher found it and showed the principal who called the parents in. These were 10-11-year-olds. 2 girls and 1 boy. The parents of the girls were mad but the mother of the boy refused to believe it was him. She went back and forth with the principal completely denying her son's involvement until the principal finally had enough. Slammed her hand down on the book and yelled it's in his journal. And the little genius signed his name. Double quote. I follow a lot of crime news. A 16-year-old boy murdered this girl who was supposedly pregnant with his kid and didn't tell him after 6 months. I guess she had some foresight into the type of person he was but still wanted to keep the kid. Anyway, the guy's parents come out saying it wasn't his fault. He would never do something like that. He has always been a good boy. Makes me wonder if his family is just in denial or if you really can't know what somebody may be plotting even in your own home. Not a teacher. I worked summer camp at my local park and we had the little brother of a city council member attend. That child was a demon spawn. Constantly bullied other kids and then played the victim. Never followed the rules. Just a general spoiled kid, but since his older sister was a council member he never got reprimanded. When someone did mention that perhaps, the kid was possibly not on his best behavior, his mom would go, "Well, I know that's not true because my angel doesn't behave this way at home, so you're lying." Double quote. And X200B. We had to ban playing at the park because he fell and scraped his knee by using playground equipment improperly. The summer program was at the park. It was hard to explain to the kids why they couldn't use the playground equipment. This isn't my story, but it's a story from my mom when she was a 3rd grade teacher. This kid was bullying other kids on the playground physically. He gave one boy a bloody nose. Another day he ripped some little girl's doll's head off and flushed it down the toilet. Needless to say he had some behavioral issues and punishing him, no recess, was not working. My mother called the parents in to have a chat about his behavioral problem. The mother agreed to work on it while the dad, they were divorced BTW, argued that he was a perfect angel and never did anything wrong. Turns out the dad let the kid do whatever he wanted and was never home because he stayed at some random girl's place every other night. The poor kid was just acting out because he was confused. I hope he got better. Stroke. Grade 1 teacher here. Had a student who was a problem with being a DCK every day. He'd tell staff members to go FCK themselves. He'd take his full metal water bottle and hit kids over the head with it. He'd pull down boys' pants and kick them in the dink, etc. This was a school where suspending a student basically never happened. The boy was on a behavior chart that I sent to the parents daily to report serious incidents, which was at least once a day. I had called the parents in a bunch of times and they always made an excuse as to why he wasn't at fault. I remember once while meeting with the parents, they were referring to him giving the principal the middle finger that I had reported on his behavior chart. Their response: well, his father has a problem with his index finger and uses his middle finger to point at things. Our boy loves his daddy and likes to copy him. So I'm sure he was just pointing at something with his middle finger. I made a strong mental note to notice when his father threatened to shoot another student of mine for hitting his son. He pointed with his index finger without any issue. Not a teacher but an IT guy. We have a 1-to-1 program in our district so all kids grade 6-12 get a Chromebook. Had a couple of them waiting for repairs at one of my buildings. The ticket said Chromebook broken into 27 pieces, which seemed unreal to me, but sure enough it showed up in a plastic bag and it rattled around. We charge the kids for repairs and when it is considered malicious intent it can get expensive. Well, in this case this kid broke his sister's Chromebook in half and his into a bunch of pieces, hence the bag being needed to hold them all. A bill went home for $200 each and the parents came in demanding to know why. I wanted to give the good news myself and pulled all the bits out of my salvage pile. Brought it down to the office and dropped it on the secretary's desk for the head secretary, the principal, and the mom to look through. I managed to keep the smile off of my face but only barely. Now the office staff generally take me at my word when I mark things as malicious intent. A kid I grew up with had a habit throughout elementary of shouting inappropriate words and lashing out at others, and himself, physically. His parents never addressed the issue and it escalated until about 5th grade. He got to a point where the school could not accommodate him. He got diagnosed by a state doctor and was found to have Tourette's syndrome. Bear in mind, this is the mid-80s and few people knew about this affliction. He started receiving proper meds and now leads a decent life, as far as I know. But his parents always thought that a little structure and understanding would cure him. Well, they got the understanding part right. I once had a teacher try to accuse of plagiarism based solely on her assertion that high schoolers don't use the word ominous. My essay was trash and thrown together. But the one word stuck out to her. 5 years after I graduated she mailed my mom a package. It contained my essay, a printed essay from the internet, and a letter from the teacher. She went on and on about how she could never get my essay out of her head. She went into great detail about her vast efforts to prove my fraud. My mom sent her back her own package with bottom of her printed internet essay circled. The part circled had my name as submitter and date of month of accusation during my senior year. When I was like 8 and my cousin 7, I told his grandma, my mom's sister, that he told a kid that went sleep in his house to fuck off. She didn't believe me and said, "Don't lie like that. Your cousin would never do that. He was really rude." But for some reason my aunt doesn't see that and licks his ass. Later he fell down the stairs, got a little hurt and said that the other kid punched him. My aunt said he didn't. I saw. You just fell. He got mad and told her to FCK off. Nowadays he is much worse. He often bullies his friends from his street. One time my other cousin, not his brother, broke his friend's bike. Instead of doing a rational thing he just laughed and ignored his friend crying. And guess what? She still says that he's a pure and innocent angel sent from heaven for her to take care of. Okay, I'm not a teacher, but still a no. Not my child. Story. In primary school, I got bullied a lot by almost half of my class. My only friends, they were good friends so my life didn't suck, lived a couple of streets away, next to a football, soccer for the Yanks, field where we'd play almost every day. So one day this group of kids from my class showed up and challenged us to a game. At one point this kid tried to take me out with one heck of a dangerous tackle, and I called him out for it. This dude then proceeded to chase me around for a bit, until we reached some stairs up a hill. By that time I'd been doing karate for approximately 3 years. And since the kid was bigger and faster, I decided to kick backward with everything I had. The dude fell down the hill and had a pretty bruised chest. His mom proceeded to come down to my house to scold me and call me a horrible child for attacking her son. To which my mother told her to FCK off and threw the door in her face. We went to get cake immediately after. This one was courtesy of my mother, who was a teacher. And from what I remember, it happened at least twice. In both cases, she had a conference or phone call with a kid's mother over the kid terrorizing other kids. Said kids would start shit, then go home and tell mommy the stories. Exactly as they had played out. But with the victim and the perpetrator switched. So, when said mother finally arrived, she's ripshty about her child being bullied all year, when he's in fact the bully. Seemingly no amount of lady, I was there and have no special grudge against your child, was enough to make a dent. One is a meth addict now. So I would say things worked out. Late to the party. But oh well. Had a student who had another person write a solid 95% of their paper for them. Had a meeting with parent and principal in which I showed the parent version history on Google Docs so they could see whose account did what. Principal saw it as cut and dry plagiarism. Just like me. Parent said daughter did it all. Even work that was timestamped while the daughter was playing a basketball game. Parent will probably deny that her darling daughter cheated until the day she dies. Kid, 16, was with a friend on a Friday night doing drugs, including drinking entire bottles of cough syrup. This was a couple decades ago, before meth changed the ingredients and availability. Kid came home. Eventually had to be taken to the hospital and stomach pumped. Parents came in following week and insisted he'd had a diabetic shock reaction despite no history of it, and presumably despite whatever the contents were from the stomach pump. Learned about the drugs from the kid and his friend, who couldn't believe the level of denial his parents were in. And also to somewhat apologize for the unnecessary steps we had to take to be prepared for another diabetic episode. I work with kids who need a very structured environment with rules and must have consequences for their bad behavior. A kid was asked to turn his phone in and refused because we asked with 1 minute left of lunch. I asked one more time. Let them know if the phone isn't turned and then he will lose his privileges for the next day. Kid's response was to tell me to FCK myself, and several other students went to grab their phone since they saw the kid do the same thing. Well, of course kid lost his privileges for the next day, and after the kids left I emailed the parents to tell them what happened. Made it as though it wasn't a big deal and tried to make it seem like their kid will do better, since I know these parents will flip their shit if I tell them the truth. The kid was being a rude piece of shit. Next morning in the middle of class, parents show up demanding to speak with me about the incident. I was dumbfounded and had to stop the class for an hour, explain to the parents and the kid what happened. Mom demanded I tell the kid I was sorry because they were just trying to enjoy the last few moments of lunch with their phone. I had to explain to the mom the last 5 minutes of lunch are a passing period. Exception for all students is to be in class before the last bell. Mom lost her shit. Sued the school a month later, stating we did not provide the least restrictive environment for her kid. Last I heard, the kid was kicked out of several private schools for his behavior. Daycare I worked at had a little boy who attended for his first year of preschool. So 3 to 4 years old. Kid could go from 0 to 100 in a split second if he didn't get his way and would start spewing "fuck you bitch, stupid bitch, you're an arsehole whore." I think we even got a cunt from him once. Not exactly the kind of language you want in a room full of 3-year-olds. Whenever the parents were spoken to about this, they always denied it or would say he must be imitating another kid in the class because they never use words like that. Cue the Christmas play where all of the parents are in attendance and recording, and little guy has one of his classic meltdowns center stage, swearing at his mom the whole time she's trying to pull him away. Not a teacher, but at the summer day camp I worked at, the kids called me their teacher. Anyway, this kid is like 8 years old, I think. Definitely 1st or 2nd grade though. It's his first day at our day camp. At a nearby park, he grabbed a kid's shoulders, threw him to the ground, choked him, and then after we finally got over there he booked it. My coworker, who plays college baseball, ran for 45 minutes trying to catch this kid. So he finally gets tired and we bring him back to the camp from the park. And he has a pretty regular day other than a couple exceptions of not being quiet as told. Not behaving in line. Whatever. We ask him why he did that. And he said something like, he had a rock I wanted. So I thought about asking him. But I wasn't gonna take no. So I did what I did. So his mom comes up and she asks how his day was and we explain what he did. And she says something like, oh, I'm actually a behavioral psychologist specializing in young adolescents. We work on tools for when he is angry. He'd never do that. All I said was, well, sorry, but they don't work. If it happens again, he gets kicked out. I felt kinda bad. But man, kid had anger issues and I was grossly underpaid to put up with that shit. Not for me. Man. Science teacher. First year I traveled between two schools. So if make the answer key to the test as the kids were taking it, I'd then walk around the room monitoring. After the second test, kids came to me and let me know they thought a fellow student was cheating by copying my answer key. I thanked them and said I'd handle it. Next test I did everything the same except making an incorrect key. Hard to do BTW. Then the next day I apologized to the class as I'd apparently misnumbered the key and if they'd checked their answers before they left the key was wrong. The guilty party's white face was worth it. When I confronted him after class he left. I went to my supervisor right away to let him know. Mom actually tried to get me fired for entrapment. Lol, didn't work. Not a teacher, but the community service chair. So I would manage and enter all the community service hours for all the students in my high school, about 3,000 kids. For reference, the amount of times that some angry parent emailed me about how their kid has turned in 50 service hours, yet their total is still 0, baffled me. Especially because they would get angrier if I told them that I hadn't received any forms from their daughter because I somehow lost them. It's nowhere near as bad as some other stuff on this thread was. They were all good kids. They were just lying to their parents and probably didn't realize that it came down to making some teenagers' life a little bit harder. I covered for the kids when I could never accuse them of anything. But it was pretty clear that most of the parents didn't realize they were talking to a 17-18-year-old student. Not a school administrator or official. It was actually pretty comedic at the time.